Marks 1 year since the insurrection at our nation's capital. The deadly attack showed us many things, right? Including the level of danger that misinformation and hate-driven violence can cause.
Yeah, just in the last 2 years, the Anti-Defamation League says it's tracked nearly 8,400 incidents of extremism or anti-Semitism in the United States. In the new book, It Could Happen Here, the ADL's national director and CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, offers a guide on how we, as individuals, as organizations, and as a society, can strike back against hate. And he joins us live now this morning. Good morning, Jonathan. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning, Hazel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, let's just get right to it. I mean, extremist violence clearly getting worse in recent years. So what do you think is behind all of this?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I think that's really the reason why I wrote the book. We have seen an normalization of extremism in recent years. We've seen it across the country. We've seen it here in New York. You know, the ADL, as you said, is one of the oldest anti-hate groups in the world. We've been tracking extremists for generations. We saw over 600 extremist incidents in New York in 2020, half of which were white supremacist propaganda distributions, right? And we saw literally over 460 hate crimes in New York. We just had another anti-Semitic assault in Brooklyn over the weekend. Yeah. So what's behind it? I think number one, you've got people in positions of authority who have literally made prejudice part of their political toolkit. From former President Trump to people on the far left to others, you have seen the weaponization of anti-Semitism and hate. I think secondly, the country is more polarized than it's ever been. People have retreated to their respective tribes. And you see it now where people, the polling indicates, think that it might be a time to use violence against the government.
Right.
It's no accident that I released the book this week, the one-year anniversary of the attack on the Capitol.
Yeah, and you know, and specifically since the beginning of the pandemic, there's just so much misinformation out there on so many different levels, right? And so how do you address in this book, or how are you seeing at the ADL, how misinformation, as we see all over social media, can certainly lead to violence?
There's no doubt. I mean, misinformation is malevolent. It's like a kind of virus, Dan, I think. And there are different things that we're doing. First and foremost, going right after social media. I think Facebook is the front line on fighting hate today. And we know that if you on WPIX put out information that was false or slanderous, right, you'd be liable for that. But the social media companies have a loophole in the law, and their algorithms are engineered to promote the most profane content, right? The content that drives clicks and enrages people. So we've got to get our arms around a better set of behaviors by these companies. And if they can't put people over profits, Dan, I think the government needs to get engaged because it's tearing our country apart.
Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating. It feels like we've not made any kind of positive movement in years, decades almost.
Yeah, I mean, you see, we're in a very fragile moment today. The extreme right, the liberal left, they're sort of converging. And I think those of us, like as an ADL, an organization that's been fighting anti-Semitism for decades, myself, I'm the grandson of a Jewish Holocaust survivor from Germany who never would have guessed that his homeland would literally turn him into an enemy of the state, destroy everything that he loved, and slaughter his family and friends. And I'm the husband of a political refugee from Iran, a Jewish woman whose family lived there for thousands of years and never would have guessed that indeed after the Islamic Revolution, it would regard them as enemies of the state and force them to flee. So I think we need to appreciate in America that what we have is fragile, and we've got to fight for it if we want to preserve this democracy.
You know, Jonathan, there are so many events throughout the course of history, really, that shape the course and path of the country, right? And so we mentioned that tomorrow is 1 year since the deadly insurrection, the Capitol insurrection. So how do you think America has changed and is different today than it was 1 year ago?
Well, I think there's good and bad news. Here's the bad news, right? Americans today are deeply distrustful of the government. The polling indicates, particularly among conservatives and so-called independents, they believe it may be the time to use violence against elected officials. That's pretty frightening. And I think the economic inequities have exacerbated the sense of difference, Dan. But here's the good news. I think you're seeing a re-engagement in civil society. People realize now that if we lose voting rights, if we, again, continue with cancel culture, this threatens what we hold dear. So I think people now realize we've got to roll up our sleeves, and that's why I wrote the book. Yeah. It's got lots of strategies and tactics and tips for what you, whether you're an educator or a parent or a CEO, can do to stop hate when it happens in your arena.
Yeah, can you share some of those tips with us this morning?
Sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, we have got to interrupt intolerance when we see it. Not just when it happens, again, when someone from the other tribe says something that we don't like. It's easy to point fingers, but we've got to show some kind of accountability when it happens on our own side, number one. Number two, I really don't believe in cancel culture. I prefer what my friend Nick Cannon calls counsel culture. We've got to give people the chance to repent and be redeemed when they make a mistake, not impose a litmus test and throw them out for life. And then number three, I think we've got to participate in our democracy. That means showing up for a school board meeting and speaking out in a constructive, fact-based way. It means calling stuff out on social media when we see it. We just can't sit idly by. We've got to engage in our democracy if we want to defend it.
Understood. Jonathan Greenblatt, I think it's great information you have there. The book is out today, right?
Yes, it's out yesterday, actually, but you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or go to adl.org.
There you go. Jonathan Greenblatt, appreciate your time this morning, okay? Thank you.
Dan and Hazel, thank you.